Hi, it's Penny here, and today we're going to be wrapping up all the books that I read in the month of July. Now, in July, I did only read 7 books, which is a lot less than I normally read, but still a decent amount. I'm not mad about it. I also moved house, so I had plenty of things going on. As usual, I will be doing this wrap-up book battle style where I pair up all the books, I battle them against each other until we come up with the best book of the month. Firstly, let's do a 3-way battle of all the more epic fantasy type books that I read. So we're going to have The Sword of Kaigen by Wang up against Edgedancer by Brandon Sanderson, as well as Mistborn, The Secret History by Brandon Sanderson. So starting with The Sword of Kaigen, this is a really popular, originally self-published fantasy, but then I believe it has been picked up by a traditional publisher. And in this story, we follow mainly a mother and a daughter in this quite isolated village where the men of this village have been brought up to really believe that they are the warriors that protect the rest of the nation from other opposing forces. But the mother has also spent some time out of that town, and she knows a bit more about what's going on in the world and a lot more of kind of the secrets of the world. And then as well, her son is now learning some of those things as well as training to become a warrior himself. And I really loved the kind of the first third, or maybe even less, where it's setting up kind of these questions about the world, and there's a lot of mystery. And the world itself is very interesting because I think when you hear about this book, mainly it's described as a fantasy, but there are signs that outside of this village there is a lot of technology, or even in this village they're like in the process of setting up these like cell phone towers and they watch TV, so it's like not strictly the kind of more historical fantasy that you might think it is. I also really liked though the incorporation of Japanese culture, although I have seen some people criticize it in that they don't think it's as creative because it's just rehashing Japanese culture, but I don't think that's really that valid a criticism. But anyway, I really loved the beginning, the setup, because kind of like the internal struggles that this mother and son are going through and the kind of the bond that is forming between them. However, then we have like a significant part of the book which is just this giant drawn out battle scene, and we are, while that's happening, learning about the magic of the world, which was interesting, but it just went on for so long, and I do not like battle scenes enough for that. And then after that battle scene, the whole story, I felt like it took a turn where instead of now following along with the characters as they experience this story, instead of doing that, we were just getting dropped into scenes that I felt like the author had maybe fantasized about for a long time and were supposed to have a lot of emotional impact, but because they didn't have the foundation around these scenes, for me at least, they didn't have that emotional impact. And there was also a lot about the world in the second half that was being just like info dumped on us by characters, like explaining things to other characters at times and like in situations where I just couldn't really believe that they would be taking the time to talk about that. And there was so much interesting stuff about the world that just wasn't explored. Now I have found out that there are, I think, like 3 books kind of published previously to this book that are kind of set later in time, so in a lot of ways Sword of Kaigen is a prequel type thing. Primarily I think about the parents of the main characters in these other books, and so I do wonder whether some of that I thought was interesting is explained or is explored in those other books. But also I didn't like Sword of Kaigen enough to really go and do that exploration. I do think I will be trying Blood Over Brighthaven, which is Wang's other book that a lot of people rave about, because I'm hopeful. I've heard it described as like dark academia, so I'm hopeful that's a little bit more my style. And I really thought in the beginning Sword of Kaigen was going to be my style, but the ending just didn't do it for me, and I'm kind of surprised that it's getting as many rave reviews as it is getting, given the way the story goes in the second half. Then we have Edgedancer. This was a reread for me, so I am rereading a lot of the books in the Cosmere before finally getting into Rhythm of War, and so I got up to Edgedancer, which is a novella in the Cosmere, or in the Stormlight Archives, that follows this character named Lift. Lift is one of my least favorite characters, or at least that is what I have believed previously. But On a reread, I kind of liked Edgedancer better than I thought. I think I had forgotten a lot of depth that you get in Liv's character in Edgedancer. There is still a fair amount of like Brandon Sanderson's humour, but it's not too over the top like I think some of his later humorous works have been. And now having like reread and read more of the Cosmere than I had when I first read Edgedancer, I think I picked up on a lot more of what was going on, and so I found the story just in general more interesting. Although it's possible that I had found it interesting the first time and then I'd just forgotten and focused on the fact that the humour was a little bit annoying. I do think there's a lot of banter between Lift and this like spirit creature that she keeps around her, and I did quite enjoy that banter. So maybe the humour didn't entirely annoy me. And I haven't really talked about what the plot of Edgedancer is because I don't think you can really get into it without spoilers, which is also true of the other book in this battle, which is Mistborn, A Secret History. What I will say is that this details events that were happening during the Mistborn trilogy, but like in that world, but kind of aside from the main events of what are happening in the Mistborn books. And from the author's note, I know that Brandon Sanderson had always kind of had in his head that these events are happening on the side, but I'm very glad that he left them out of the main Mistborn books because, to be honest, the story just isn't that interesting from the perspective of the world and like the Stormlight archives. It is very interesting and you learn a lot more about the magic that I feel like is kind of critical for you to have read if you're reading the Stormlight archives. Like, this makes me think, I haven't read Rhythm of War or Wind and Truth, but I suspect that if you read the Stormlight archives without having read Mistborn, A Secret History, that you're maybe missing out on some stuff. And also that means though, because you can't read Mistborn, A Secret History without having read Mistborn, so suddenly Stormlight archives are not as like standalone as they seemed previously, and like, can you then just go straight into Stormlight archives without having read Mistborn? I guess you can, but you'd definitely be missing some things. I don't know, maybe we'll come back to that opinion once I've read Rhythm of War and Wind and Truth. But anyway, let's battle these three books up against each other. I am firstly going to take off Edgedancer because I don't let rereads win the battle, which I'm a little bit sad about because I do think Edgedancer was the best of these three. So then if we've got Sword of Kaigen and Mistborn, A Secret History, I actually have to pick the Sword of Kaigen, even though I was very disappointed in it, just because it was a much better story. The setup was really great. Whereas Mistborn, A Secret History was only interesting from like an in-depth Cosmere perspective. And as an actual story, I didn't think it was that good, which I think from the author's note, Brandon knows that. Okay, so we'll put Sword of Kaigen through to the next round. Then for the next battle, we've got Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell up against The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. So Someone You Can Build a Nest In is a super weird book. We are following this shapeshifter and it starts out with this really nostalgic scene where this shapeshifter is reminiscing about having been born in the remains of her father, who her and her siblings then ate. So it's talking about eating people, and it's written in a very graphic way, but it's also written in this very nostalgic, cozy vibe. And I would say the whole book is like that. On one side almost has this cozy fantasy vibe about it, as our main character, this shapeshifter, meets this other woman that she really cares about, but they also have to deal with the fact that the people in this world are trying to track down the shapeshifter and kill her, and also they have to deal with the very abusive family dynamics in this like monster hunter family that this woman she has a crush on is a part of. So there's a lot in this book about trauma and abuse and then healing from trauma, and there's also a lot of like body horror because this shapeshifter is basically some kind of like slime type thing, but she can absorb body parts or just any other objects and use them to like give herself form. And so there's a lot of disgusting descriptions of her like consuming body parts and then using them in strange ways to make her body seem more human or sometimes very inhuman. And I really enjoyed it. I will say there were bits where I think the plot was a little bit drawn out or didn't really make sense. So from a plot perspective, this probably wasn't the strongest, and some parts of the character development I don't think really stood up either. But from a vibes perspective and just kind of the general theme of healing from trauma, I think this book was really great, and I think if you like both cozy fantasy and like body horror, and you'd like to see those things together, then this is the book. This is the book to read. Then I read The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. So this is kind of a retelling of the story, the true story of Mozart's sister. So by all accounts, in real life, Mozart's sister was very musically talented herself. She was a piano prodigy and secretly composed her own music, even though at the time it was not really allowed that a woman would do that, and she was just expected to basically get married and have children. And there are now no records of her music, even though it's very clear that Mozart himself was very inspired by her. So as well, in real life, both Mozart and his sister had this imaginary world called the Kingdom of Back that they used to kind of deal with the stress of being paraded around all these different kingdoms and made to perform. So in Marie Lu's story, she's basically telling a story as if the Kingdom of Back was a real fantasy kingdom that these two children were going to, alongside dealing with the fact that they are musical prodigies. And there are some descriptions of the Kingdom of Back that I thought were really beautiful. I think some people would really like this kind of fairy tale world alongside the real world and how it kind of links into the music that they're creating. But I found it a little bit boring and just a little bit like typical fairy tale. As well, a big theme of this is Mozart's sister, her kind of ambition and her not wanting to be forgotten. And I found it all very hard to relate to, even though like I can definitely get on board with how frustrating it is that men, especially back in these times, were expected to create a legacy and women were not allowed. And I actually really liked the author's note. So at the end, Marie Lu talks about how when she first discovered Mozart's sister's story, how much it meant to her. And she talks a lot about the importance of raising up women and like pushing ahead so that it's easier for future generations. And I really like the author's note, but I just couldn't connect to the way the themes were being presented in the book, because personally I don't necessarily care about being forgotten. But maybe if you like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue from a relatability perspective, then maybe you would like this one. I do know some people like it, and I thought it was okay. It was well written. It just wasn't something that interested me. So if I'm putting these two books up against each other, I think it's pretty obvious that I am going to pick Someone You Can Build a Nest In. Then for our last battle, we have The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton up against Sweep in Peace by Ilona Andrews. So The Last Murder at the End of the World is a sci-fi mystery. Basically, there's been some kind of apocalypse where this fog has spread out all across the world, and it's got these horrible insects in it, and when you go in it, you die. But there is this one island which has been protected by technology, and we're following the villagers who live on this island as well as the 3 scientists that lead them. The scientists are people who have been around since before the apocalypse of the world, and they are very long-lived, whereas the main villagers are not. As well, on this island there is this like AI security system, and the AI security system can basically read everyone's thoughts, and so the story is written from the AI security system's perspective, but we get kind of different perspective chapters from different characters as the AI presents the story from their different perspectives. And I just love the way it was done, because the AI knows so much more about what's going on than the villagers, and every now and then will insert little like comments on the villagers' thoughts that make you think, what's really going on? And I just throughout the story loved the sense of intrigue. It's really a mystery. So the thing I've missed out is about a third of the way through the book. It kind of in the synopsis makes you think it's going to happen straight away, but it does build up to it, and about a third of the way through the book there is a murder, and then the villagers now have a limited amount of time to solve the murder, or otherwise this AI security system is going to take down the barriers that stop the fog from getting onto the island. But just throughout the book you're getting little bits of information about what's really going on, and it's just so interesting trying to work it out. And every time you get a little bit of information and a bit of the mystery revealed, you get more and more questions about what's actually going on, and I just had such a good time with it. I have seen some reviews, in fact a lot of reviews, saying that they found it boring, and I will say there's not a lot of action and probably not even kind of like any big moments. It's more about just like this constant process of intrigue and revelation. So I can see that it wouldn't appeal to everyone, but I had a really good time with it. And another book I had a really good time with was Sweep and Peace. So this is the second book in the Innkeeper Chronicles by Ilona Andrews. I really like Ilona Andrews. I've read their stuff before. In the Innkeeper Chronicles, we are following this girl named Dina, who is an innkeeper, and in this world, all the supernatural creatures of the world are aliens, and Earth is kind of right in the middle of, let's say, a intergalactic highway type thing. So a lot of aliens want to stop in at Earth, but there's an agreement that basically they can't present themselves to regular humans. So whenever aliens stop on Earth, they will stay in these inns. And the innkeeper's jobs are basically to keep the aliens safe from humans, but also keep humans from knowing anything about these aliens. And in this particular book, Dina's Inn is hosting a peace summit between these different alien races. And I just really love the way that Ilona Andrews will set up a lot of different things, but have all those different plot threads come together in a really satisfying way. As well, these books are actually very high action, as well as having a fair amount of humor. But it's the kind of humor that I personally really like. And I think the way that Ilona Andrews does action and like fight scenes also stops them from getting too boring. They tend to be fairly short and to the point, and also always important to the plot. So I had a lot of fun with this book, and I am definitely excited to be continuing that series. But if I am putting these two books up against each other, I do still think The Last Murder at the End of the World was just so much more intriguing. I think intriguing is the word I'm going with for that book, and I had such a great time with it. And I feel like it's so different from a lot of other things I've read, which I don't think I would say. Well, maybe I would say about Sweep and Peace, just because of the way it's combining sci-fi and fantasy. But The Last Murder at the End of the World was just so much fun to read. I just didn't want to put it down at all while I was reading it. So I'm going to put The Last Murder at the End of the World through to the finals, and because we only had 3 battles this month, that means we're going to do a final battle for the best book of the month. So that will be The Sword of Kaigen by Wang, up against Someone You Can Build a Nest In by Wiswell, up against The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart. Turton. So firstly, we're going to take away The Sword of Kaigen because, as you know, I really like the beginning, but the ending means it was a no. Then for the remaining 2, like, I really recommend both of these if they sound like something you would like. And I did really like both of these for quite different reasons. But I think my favorite would have to be The Last Murder at the End of the World. So that's going to be the best book of the month. And even though it has fairly low ratings, I would still recommend it. Just know that you're getting into kind of like a slow-paced sci-fi mystery, and don't be expecting something else. I do think if you've liked Stuart Turton's other works, especially The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, like, I think you would like it. And I think it has a much more satisfying ending than that one did. Anyway, let me know if you've read any of the books I talked about in this video, because I would love to talk with you about them down in the comments, or let me know what the best thing you read in the month of July was. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.